So, hi, Larry, and welcome.
Hello, 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 everybody.
And I've invited Larry Larry's a member of the Racial Justice Collaborative, and we're very concerned about the issues that are coming out. It started off with pushback on 1619 and the critical race theory, but now it's just Black history and finding many groups, it looks like Republican states, are finding Black history as not relevant or not important. So I wanted to bring Larry on, who has taught this topic for many years, to talk about that. So Larry, can you talk about critical race theory and what's happening?
Um, I'm not quite sure what you're asking me to say about critical race theory.
Well, can you first tell us what is it? Because I think people don't understand what it is.
Well, as I understand the term, I myself am puzzled by it. As I understand the term, critical race theory uh, is a curriculum that critiques the history of people of African descent in America, um, which is and how Black presence and Black activity was so hugely influential into the creation of American history, the making of American history. Not only the physical labor, which created enormous wealth in American history, but also the politics of American history.
Uh,
And
yes.
for many, many years, there was when I was growing up in the 50s in high school, there was no such thing as Black history. You know, even in college, there was no such thing as Black history, I don't think. I went to a small Quaker college, Earlham College, and I don't believe that I didn't start hearing about Black history until I began teaching in a Black school in Washington, D.C., Cardozo High School in 1965. And then I started, you know, researching uh, and learning Black history, which I didn't know anything about.
And Larry, I think um, we started doing something called Black history because the history that was American history had very little kind of, it brought Black people and slavery and the history of Black people in America. It brought Black people in very small and narrow ways. And I think Black history was an opportunity to broaden that. But it's really confusing because Black history is not separate from American history. It's how America has become what America, whatever it is that America is,
Right.
and the part that Black people and the relationship that the United States has had to Black people. And so now that's what we're looking at. But this is not a separate history. This is all American history.
The whole point. That is the very important point.
So now, Larry, what do you think about the current discussion that as we're seeing um, the questioning about the relevance of the history of Black people to the history of America? What's going on with that?
Well, you know, what it appears to me to be happening is there's literally a political attempt to criminalize Black history in public schooling and in some public colleges, if not private colleges. Literally, to criminalize it. It can't be taught. It can't be mentioned. I mean, the same thing is true of gay history. I don't think it's so much true of women's history. I'm not quite clear. Uh, um, but, you know, literally it's criminalized. You
Well,
know,
and
in,
it and it
in Florida, you know, you can't say gay in school curriculum.
Yes, and when we looked at the advanced placement course on African American history, it was the queer history, the gay history, the all the issue. You can't talk. I don't think women, but when you talk about sex or gender, then that's something that there just wants to be control to me over what exactly is taught or what is even said or what you can possibly read, because they're looking at taking out the kind of the books that may talk about Black history, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, all of that, any queer studies. They want all of that gone. Why is that? What's going on?
Well, what's going on is basically the resurgence, or maybe the continual surgence of white supremacy, and a lot of conservatives, and even more than conservative, a lot of fascistic thinking politicians who are very pro autocracy as opposed to democracy believe that teaching quote unquote African American history, never mind African history, or queer history, is actually tantamount to teaching socialism. And so anything that challenges the legitimacy of capitalism, and actually, I would say American imperialism. What I mean by that is the dispossession of indigenous lands, indigenous people, the disempowerment of indigenous people, the trade and property and making property of people of African descent, all of which is vital to the whole history, the developmental history of the country. That should not be told. That should not be denied. And if it is, it should be criminalized.
And I think
it challenges the authenticity of the American narrative as told by, the truth of the matter is, in more than in several ways, the Constitution itself, if I can remember this, the Constitution itself fails to deal with the question of Black history and slavery. Right. The first is the ending of the importation of Africans raised huge power, the price of Africans, and the breeding, and encouraged the breeding, literally the breeding of Africans as capital, as the breeding of capital. The second was counting 2/3 of the Black population for the southern states that didn't have the representative in Congress numbers that the northern states like New York and Massachusetts that had the large populations. That gave a disproportionate power to the southern states. And the third was the fugitive slave law that literally allowed the recapture of runaway slaves and legitimized that and codified that into law. So the Constitution in its original form was a very pro-slavery document. Now, teaching those 3 points is critical theory, is critical race theory, showing how critical the treatment of African Americans, people of African descent, was critical to the making of American wealth, American capitalism. And when you teach that, how never mind the dispossession and the disempowerment of native peoples, native cultures, and native communities and their political power was critical to the making of American wealth. And that's that's a matter of historical fact, you know. And so, it's very interesting because when you start teaching this, like I began teaching this. Well, first of all, the first 5 years I was teaching, I was in an all black school, Cardozo, and when you start teaching this history that they didn't know and I didn't know, we were learning all this history together. It was very empowering to the students. And, you know, they just saw history prior to all of that as memorizing dates, places, you know, persons with no understanding of what its critical importance was. And when you suddenly start teaching how this worked, you know, and then the question was how to teach this without making without depressing or demoralizing or disempowering black students, you know, like because history can be seen as so negative, but that you know it turns them off. So how you teach that in a way, you know, that inspires, you know, so you start talking about black resistance and black organizing, and, you know, slave rebellions and runaway and all the different ways that, you know, black agency, African agency, and
And
that that
Larry,
very
what
important.
I what I what I'm reading now is that there's an effort to maintain uh, the first half of the equations, the part that says and all men are created equal. Like this is a country that was developed for everybody, and that all people are created equal. And so at the same time, we see the enslavement of the capture and enslavement of black people and bringing them here to do the work and build the country. So these two things just don't have a hard time sitting together. That we're a country that believes in, you know, freedom and equality. At the same time, we believe in slavery and subjugation of black people. And but those two things have grown up together, and now that people say that we're having a racial reckoning, or we've always had this confusion, and so that seems to be pushing um, people, white people, some white people, lots of white people, to because they say they don't want their children to learn that America had this split personality, does not want to have their children hear things that may disturb them or make them feel bad about white people. So, what do you think about that? How does that work?
I I see it a little bit differently. The way I is that the language that I've seen, the commentary that I've seen that goes along with this, what I call criminalizing Black history in curriculum, in public school curriculum, um, is that we don't want to make white children feel uncomfortable or feel guilty of something that they had no part in doing. Right.
Yeah, that's the same thing I thought.
And you know, I mean, and that's an important thing. You don't want them to feel guilty. That's not the point of teaching that history. And in fact, it can be taught that way, and is often taught that way, and often makes them feel uncomfortable and turns them off, right? And so that, you know, you have to develop a practice that is very conscious of not doing that. Not that we shouldn't feel, you know, some shame in what this history was and how this history happened, but you know, it's how it's in a certain way. I don't want to say depersonalize history. In fact, I want to personalize and humanize history. But that's what the story is. You know, that it's a real conflict of class and race and gender. I mean, and the system is filled with a lot of contradictions and paradoxes. You know, because when you say all men are created equal, all white men are created equal. When you say, but then we had slavery, well, they weren't considered people. That's the whole point. They were property. And even when they were free under slavery, they were still not citizens. They still didn't have any rights, constitutional rights. So all that had to change, and that's been the progress of American history, is the inclusion. I mean, women couldn't vote, women vote, all the discrimination and all of the disempowerment, if you will, of huge segments of our population. Basically, the civil rights movement was a struggle against all that. And Black historians, I mean, who were the Black historians? Even though they were Carter Woodson and Franklin and Du Bois and all of them were writing, they weren't being taught, for a very long time.
So Larry, let's look at that. Let's go into that a little more, because it's a fine line. And maybe there's no line. Maybe sometimes you have to let things be the way they are, because at the same time, we are seeing that we don't want white children to feel bad about the history of lynching or the history of what white people have done to Black people over centuries. We've got Black children who have grown up, their parents, everybody, all these Black people who have learned that they were less than, that those things could be done to their people with impunity because white is right. And so how do we balance that? There's a hopelessness right now with Black people and Black kids. We see it all the time. The willingness to kill each other because Black life is not worth anything. That's taught. So how do we pull that? How do we change that? And at the same time, white kids should not be ashamed. But it is what it is. So so not be ashamed, but how do we ensure something different? And I think that's the problem. We also don't want justice. We don't want to work toward balancing things out and bringing justice. We don't want wealth. We talk about redistribution like there's a problem with that. And we talk about socialism like all the good programs in the United States are already socialism. It's only the socialism we don't want when Black people may benefit. So these are things that have to be balanced. You can't just leave hopeless Black people feeling, or not just feeling, taught inequality, less than, not even a human being is the way they were treated in history. So how do we do that?
Well, I think, we teach about the struggle to the political struggle of people who were oppressed and people who were discriminated against, how they organized their agency and their advocacy. I mean, it's a great story. It was, how they literally changed the Constitution, with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which by in and of themselves, have also been, the carceral state comes out of basically denying or flipping the 13th Amendment, on its head. So, I mean, you could have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and still have problems, right? You can have people, voter rights and the carceral state and, equal protection. I mean, it looks like the Supreme Court sometime this spring is going to overthrow affirmative action. I mean, people right now are really fearing what the court's going to do with, student loans. Wait till they find out what six on the court are going to do with affirmative action. They're going to overthrow it.
Well, but see, we're seeing that already lining up.
Yes.
because we see that legislatures and universities and corporations are more than willing to throw out any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion language, insurance, or trying to make sure that there's lack of discrimination in our programs. So there's a rush to go back to to go full on white supremacy.
Right. Well, the thing is that there's a basic constant contradiction um, between capitalism and democracy. I mean, that's the struggle of American history, right? Um, and it's both the power of American history and it's also the problem with American history. That there's a systematic way to disempower and a systematic way to empower under the Constitution. And that
Right.
struggle, teaching that struggle and teaching how capitalism, um, you know, in many ways contradicts a lot of the tenets that we hold true about democracy, that has to be taught and explained. Of course, when you start to do that, you're accused of, being socialist. Well, in fact, you are in a sense, right? And that's part of the problem. I mean, critical race theory is really opens up the way to critique capitalism and talk about socialism, and that is very threatening to the system. And
So
that's what this is doing.
yeah, so if we take away, all the rest of this stuff is discussion because because power that is the power of capitalism does not it's not a caring it doesn't have the quality of care. So it doesn't care about black children, never did, doesn't care about white children, it doesn't care about humans, it only cares about wealth, and it
Property
cares
and
about
property and
how to
wealth.
how to get more and more and more. And we see that as we see billionaires coming up out of the pandemic, growing
Now,
stronger and stronger.
one of the things that there's several basic lessons I used to teach, right? What's the difference between capital and income, or between income and wealth? Most people just use those, students, teachers, whatever, use them as the same thing. They're not the same thing, right? Wealth you teach about what is capital. Capital is anything that can make wealth, right? That can create wealth, or if not done correctly, you know, uh, destroy wealth, right? Income is just money coming in. That is such an important thing to explain, the difference between capital and income, because once you start teaching that, then you start teaching what capitalism is all about, the creation of wealth. And then when you say, well, how did we create so much wealth? Then you talk about how slavery, making human commodity out of making humans commodities, property, and first of all, to buy and sell alone created capital. Never mind their, owning their labor and turning cotton. I mean, cotton made the South the greatest capital creation machinery in the world. It eclipsed Great Britain's capital, actually, right? And then industrialization sort of took over and eclipsed that somewhat. But you teach how that happened, and what happened to labor, and how even white labor or European labor was also exploited to do this, right? And how Native Americans were dispossessed of the land, how important land is to making capital, right?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things. When the easiest thing to do is to just cut out Black history, but by doing that, you can cut you cut right into not teaching things that will destroy capitalism. That's what wants to be kept and wants to be supported. All these other things and people can go down the drain, but capitalism is the elephant on the table that we can't not touch.
Well, when you teach capitalism, the way to teach it is, you're not sitting there talking about, you know, uh, necessarily teaching about social, you're just showing that how capital was made out of dispossessing native people of their land, and how land is capital, and how the exploitation of African labor was creating capital wealth. And once you start teaching that, then you start understanding how capitalism works. And then when you start doing that, you go like, well, isn't that a problem for democracy? I mean, that's not empowering people, making citizenship. And then you start teaching the history. Well, women had to struggle for the vote. Black people had to struggle for the vote. They were denied the vote. Natives were denied the vote. They were denied citizenship, and what that struggle is about, and that's what critical race theory is all about, and how if you don't understand how all that worked to make American capital and American wealth, then it becomes some sort of it becomes nationalism. It becomes white nationalism. There's something magical about European capacity to create wealth. I mean, you mystify it, you make it a magical kind of thing. I mean,
It does. It's like looking at that painting of the white woman, the angel, up in the sky,
yeah,
from sea to shining sea, pushing out and killing all the natives so that they could bring in the wagon trains.
well,
So
that's actually a portrait of manifest destiny,
yeah,
right?
manifest destiny. Right.
That's what that is. I think
Yeah.
the painting is named Manifest Destiny. And then we
Okay.
explain, let's take that term manifest destiny, that the destiny of European supremacy, white European supremacy, was manifest in our history. It was almost God blessed, and sanctified, right?
God gave this land to me.
Totally, totally,
Yeah.
and you know, the thing is that when you start teaching Native American culture, I mean, they had a completely different attitude, towards the land and towards community and towards tribalism and all of that, and really, all of that was destroyed.
And Larry, another thing about capitalism and the wealth. Right now, there's a lot of pushback saying that uh, slavery did not make America great. This whole whatever, this magical thinking is what made America great. Because even when you look at here in the North, especially here in this area, where the cotton mills, so that the cotton mills provided um, work, jobs for new immigrants that were coming into the United States. And so we like to say that immigrants made America, but it was the cotton that was produced by slave labor that and then shipped to these cotton mills and then made opportunities for jobs. So it was the wealth that comes from slavery, and then European labor is like you said, it's also used, but wealth didn't come from immigrants. It came from slave labor.
Right. I mean, the cotton mills wouldn't have been cotton mills without the cotton, and the cotton, was cultivated by black labor. So there it is.
So
Slave labor.
what do you think is the best hope for what do you think? How do you think this we can resolve this as people looking at an election coming up? This all to me is all about the 2024 election. So how do we what do we do while all this is going on around us and we're not doing? What are we not doing? How do we get
Well,
involved?
the problem is, there's a lot of problems, but the American left movement is it's first of all very sectarian. It doesn't have great. I mean, the civil rights movement. People don't realize how incredible the civil rights movement was, right? I mean, you know, it was an extraordinary exercise of Black power, and you know, and it changed the whole course of the country. I mean, you know, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the actual sacrifices they made to bring the franchise to Black sharecroppers. Thank you very much. Not Black elite, but Black sharecroppers changed the whole course of the country in all of the South and so forth. So we don't have something comparable to that right now. It's highly sectarian. It's highly personalized. It's that's I think the real one of the real problems. The left in the country, especially the socialist left, is a mess. You know, and you know, and how is it? How did it become a mess? And you know, I can get conspiratorial about the infiltration of and the you know
And all of that happened as well. But right now, yes, I see all of that. But I also see that from the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that put in place laws to prevent discrimination. And as you were talking about the civil rights movement, it was the energy from that effort in 1964 that flowed over to the 1965 Immigration Act that changed
yes,
that changed the complexion of the country so
yeah,
that it opened up much bigger numbers for people, for Asians, I mean for South Asians, for East Asians, for all these different groups of people who were closed out in the past. And so, what I see now, I do not see a coalition forming because white supremacy has co opted all the people that came in under the Immigration Act against the black people who were doing the civil rights movement.
you know,
That's to me a big problem.
it's a huge problem. You know, it's a huge problem, and I mean, there are pockets, and maybe larger than pockets of activism, you know, in various parts of the country, um, that have the capacity, if they come together, you know, to replicate basically the movement, broadly speaking, you know. But here's the problem. The problem that we're in right now is that white America, if you will, European America is really the way I would prefer to say it. European Americans are becoming a plurality. They're no longer a majority, you know. And within about a decade, they will be nothing but a plurality, right? And that is freaking that population out. And you know, but the problem is that and they feel threatened by Black organizing, women organizing, queer organizing, even though that's all complicated because it's not like all those groups are anti-white or not white. I mean, it's more nuanced and complicated than that, but it's a real threat to whites have always had the majority in the country, right? The electoral majority in the country, and that's no longer the case.
And they're afraid.
And they're afraid of it. I mean,
they're afraid, and stockpiling guns. That's we've got this whole issue.
No, that's the arming of that population, right? There are more guns there are twice as many guns in the country as there are people. I mean, the gun manufacturers, and the gun manufacturers they're much more. The National Rifle Association used to be way more progressive around safety and use and licensing and all that kind of stuff. That became became, if you will, right wing radicalized, right? And that's been hugely, that's been a huge change in the country. I mean, when we talk about the militarization of white supremacy, we're literally talking about the militarization of white supremacy, and that's a really disturbing thing. So, you know, I see a lot of hope in young people. I see a lot of hope in um, you know, there's a funny commercial, it seems to me there's a commercial on television right now that's getting played. It's a relatively new commercial where four young women and a mother are sitting around a table eating, and they're just totally communicating with the phone. And the mother is sitting there. You don't talk to each other. You don't even realize that this fried. Look how big this fried shrimp is, and they go fried shrimp, and they say something to each other. Oh, you're talking, and they run off. And I mean that whole screens. I mean the whole thing. I mean here we are on screens talking to each other, but um, I tell you something, Diane. I love teaching. I loved it. I it was not how I was educated and raised to become a teacher. I mean, at the risk of conceit, I had a degree in international relations, a degree in journalism, and I ended up starting to teach because it became an alternative service to the draft, and I thought, oh, I'll just do this and then I'll become an education reporter. And I got totally radicalized as I learned Black history, as I learned Washington, the Black population in Washington. I mean, I didn't even, I learned the history, it completely changed my whole way of looking at the country, of looking at the city, of looking at my family, et cetera, et cetera. And it was hugely exciting. And I was able to impart that to my students and, and uh, what am I saying? I'm saying now, as much as I loved doing all that, and then I came up to Harvard to the ed school, and I got a degree from the ed school, and then I started teaching, in an radical alternative school, so I could do whatever we wanted to do with the students. And then I went up to the pilot school. I tell you, I shudder to say this, but I am grateful I'm not in a high school anymore teaching. I just think that I could never. I mean, Howard Zinn was my text. The People's History of the United States. Howard came into my classes and to my school, at critical moments to talk about these kinds of things. Never mind a lot of other people. I don't think I would be prevented from doing that even today at Ringe in Latin. I sure hope I wouldn't be, but in fact, we're creating a curriculum, about lynching that we have introduced to the high school, and and it's a very limited. But anyhow, the point of it is, I'm grateful I'm not in the high school.
And so what I see, I feel hopefulness from what you just said, because I can see it. You said that you you were learning in the Black community. You learned and you changed and you grew. And I see that. I see hopefulness in the Black liberation movement. And
Yes,
even if we can't see it now, it's happening.
I
It's
agree.
happening. It's happening in music. It's happening in hip hop. It's happening. It's happening. Black liberation. Black people. The Black struggle can save us. Can
Right,
because it engenders something in us. It brings something out in our heart and in our soul to broadens us
right.
and makes us realize that this is for everybody. This is for humanity. It's a gift. Black people are a gift
Yeah. Oh,
for
absolutely,
humanity.
absolutely. And you know, we're teaching. A group of us created this curriculum on lynching, the teaching of lynching, and how lynching became, with the demise of Reconstruction, how lynching became a way to terrorize, Reconstruction, right? And the story of Reconstruction. And so we've created this curriculum in the high school, and about 10 teachers, have been introduced to this project and so forth and so on, and it's been very impactful, and we actually took, I think, 10 teachers down. I wasn't able to go because of my illness, but we took 10 teachers down to Brian Stevenson's lynching memorial, in Montgomery. And I mean, that was hugely impactful. And they're back, and and they're trying to find ways to. And they were not just history teachers; they were from many different departments. So I mean, I am hopeful, as you are, that there's still tons of room for change and so forth.
Well, there had you know what it's like the woman I've forgotten her name, but there was a woman who recorded at the end or in the middle of the Ferguson riots. I'm sure you've seen it. And she said because there was a target that was, was being burnt, and she said the country or white people should just be glad that black people want to be included and not revenge. Because as you look at it, you say, why are we wanting this so much that we keep, through lynching, through slavery, through Jim Crow, we still want to be included
Exactly.
in America. And so we
That's
must
the
be
great,
a gift. We have to be a gift.
taking the words right out of my mouth. I mean, that was one of the ways I taught, I taught my kids. I mean, why wasn't there a race war? I mean, first of all, there's a lot of reasons why there wasn't a race war. But the point of it is that the positivity, the love, the agency, the courage, the persistence of Black culture in America is really, it's the gift, it's, it's not the gift that the traders, the race trade, thought they were bringing to the country.
Right.
But
It is a gift, and it's an empowering. It's like what you described, how it changed you, and it made you bigger and
right,
more and
right.
could do more. And this is what it brings for everybody. And this struggle against it is it's amazing. It's amazing to
It
see
is
that it's
amazing because,
amazing.
I mean, I often say, listen, I had not that I come from wealth, because I do not come from wealth, but I did have the wealth of a Sidwell Friends education in Washington, D.C., Earlham Quaker education from my college, Johns Hopkins, and Columbia University. And then I go into teaching, and then I discovered, this whole history, and it completely changed and transformed me, and it was hugely impactful. And the fact that I could, change into all that and become the teacher I became, and had the impact on my students and they on me. That's the other thing that, I mean, I'm still in touch with my students from DC, right, who are in their late 60s and early 70s, right? Never mind my students from Pilot. I mean, the fact that I live in Cambridge and taught in Cambridge and was able to see this whole history, your son and daughter-in-law and all the other people that, who are all of whom I taught.
Yes.
Uh, so I'm aware of how impactful teaching can be and how impactful this curriculum can be.
Well, I think this is a good place for us to stop.